It's worked. Thank you. So morning everybody, and thanks for the introduction and the invitation, and thanks to all the organisers of this event, and particularly Oxford for hosting us in this amazing room. It's fantastic. I'll just give a very brief overview of the British Council for those who are not familiar with us as an organisation. I'm going to set out some of the reasons, so harking back to the earlier session, for funding gender equality and other equality interventions. I'll touch on some of the impact we aim to make as an organisation and some examples of our work, and reflect on some of the challenges and opportunities of working around gender equality and other equality areas on a global basis. So first of all, we're the UK's Agency for Cultural Relations, and our aim is to build partnerships between the UK and other countries. So we work in a broad range of areas in arts, culture, education and the English language. Within our work in education, we work at school level, in vocational education, higher education, science and research. We also work on scholarships and alumni, and marketing and insight, so quite a broad range of activities within the higher education and research space. So we are a non-departmental public body, which is a very specific status in the UK. So we have a relationship through that with the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. So a lot of our work is aligned to some of those priorities, but we are a separate independent body. And we have quite a mixed funding setup. So we get a UK government grant on an annual basis, and that's about 15% of our overall income. But we also earn income from teaching English language, from administering exams, and we also run contracts on behalf of other funders, including UK government departments, but also the European Union, national ministries in other countries, so quite a broad range of funding. And we also have funding from the governments of Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. So I'll just talk a little bit about why the British Council funds gender and EDI initiatives. So we talked about this a lot in the first session, but we have kind of the three elements to our reasons for funding. So we talk about the moral case. So I think some people touched on this in the discussion this morning, but we know that higher education institutions globally, often by default rather than necessarily by design, can reinforce gender inequalities, and we've heard some examples this morning. And there's extensive data and evidence that demonstrates the gender gaps across higher education, including underrepresentation of women and gender minorities in senior academic and leadership roles, lack of access to research funding, subject segregation, that's particularly relevant to STEM, and a lack of response to sexual and gender-based violence that disproportionately affects women, including staff and students. So there is evidence clearly that biases are ingrained into higher education systems, as they are in wider society. But I think there is a real opportunity for higher education institutions to change that for themselves, but also, as others have alluded to this morning, the wider impacts on society. So that's a really key reason for ensuring that we are working with higher education institutions to think about those changes. We talked a lot about the business case this morning. So we strongly believe that addressing gender and other inequalities in our work makes for a more effective programme and delivers better impact for the audiences and stakeholders that we work with. So we know that everybody is impacted by gender inequalities and gender relations, gender norms, but it's women, non-binary, LGBT communities, etc., who are more likely to be discriminated. So by purposefully and intentionally addressing gender inequalities, we can raise awareness, address some of the barriers to inequalities, and benefit significant groups within our society that are have historically been underrepresented. I think the legal case was also mentioned this morning, As well as the kind of UK's equality laws, the British Council has legal obligations under the International Development Gender Equality Act because a lot of our funding is official development assistance. There is a specific law which requires us to consider gender equality issues as part of our work and before funding is agreed. I just also wanted to say, we recognise the importance of an intersectional approach. So I've talked a lot about gender equality issues, but recognising that sex, gender, other characteristics, including ethnicity, race, disability, etc., intersect and combine to give really different experiences and disadvantages, which we aim to build into our approach. So I am focusing particularly on our gender equality issues at the moment. Okay, so our approach, we take a twin-track approach, which I'm sure many organisations are familiar with, but by this I mean we carry out interventions that specifically target gender equality issues, and we also aim to mainstream gender equality into all the work that we do in higher education, whether the programme has a specific equality purpose or not. I think this is not to say that we've completely cracked the mainstreaming approach. I think it's quite a difficult approach to take. But as I mentioned earlier, there is a legal requirement, and that's really helped drive and lever some engagement on this issue. Okay, so just a quick gallop through some of our targeted initiatives, just to give you a bit of a flavour of what we're doing. The first picture is of a research report, the Gender Equality in Higher Education Impacts. So this brings together global evidence on how gender inequalities are reflected in higher education, but also some excellent case studies and examples of how this is being challenged globally. So there are case studies from all over the world, from different countries, including the Athena Swan Charter as one of the examples. So Helen Mott, who's the author of that report, will be presenting on that tomorrow, so you'll hear a little bit more about it, hopefully. She's actually not here because of COVID, but you will hopefully hear from her tomorrow from a recorded message. But I think the importance of kind of doing research pieces like this, we've done other stuff around women in leadership, it's really about pulling the evidence together and influencing our own decisions on programming and what we want to focus on, but also getting these issues on the agenda with our stakeholders and partners globally and ensuring that we're addressing this. So this research has informed our Going Global Partnerships programme, which is one of the key ways in which we build connections between the UK and other countries in the higher education space. So within this programme, we've recently piloted a gender equality fund, which is absolutely targeted at gender equality initiatives within higher education institutions and building partnerships between them. So we're hoping to roll that out more broadly, depending on the results of that pilot. But we'll also hear more about the Gender Advancement for Transforming Institutions programme, which is also funded under the Going Global Partnership, so a partnership with the Government of India, the Department of Science and Technology, and including UK higher education institution partners, as well as Advance HE alongside institutions in India. We're also working on the Women in Science programme in Brazil. The photograph there is from one of our events at the Women of the World Festival in Brazil. And that's with our kind of network of people involved in the Women in Science programme. Again, they're developing a Athena Swan-inspired framework, but that programme is also really strongly about building networks between women in science across Brazil through events, workshops, publications and a podcast. And there's also work which is reaching back into schools to encourage that pipeline of girls to be interested in STEM subjects. We're also funding scholarships, particularly women in STEM scholarships particularly targeting the Americas and South Asia. including a Scotland-Pakistan funded scholarship, which is on the screen. So in terms of mainstreaming, we have some broader programs about higher education reform that we are building a kind of gender dimension into. So I'll just talk briefly about the strategic partnerships for higher education reform. So that funded some quite large partnerships, mainly in sub-Saharan Africa, in the Middle East. So the photograph shows some activity from a program in Kenya, Tanzania and Uganda. And this was really about focusing on gender-sensitive curriculum and pedagogy. So really building that into a broader program which was about increasing the employability outcomes for students in those 3 countries. We've also been a partner on the Department for Business Innovation and Skills Newton Fund programme, and as part of that, we've required every applicant to that programme to complete a gender equality statement, which will set out how their research considers gender in both the research themes, the methods, the impacts, but also the staffing and the opportunities for bringing through early career researchers. So looking at the gender considerations of all of that. So in terms of the outcomes and the impact that we're aiming to achieve, we have quite a diverse range of programs. So this broadly defines some of the areas we want to work to contribute towards. Obviously not to say that we're going to be able to create a huge change on that, but making a contribution to these different areas. So first of all, contributing to a more supportive policy environment. So this is around influencing the conversation among policymakers, ensuring gender equality issues and other equalities are highlighted and prioritised, but also some of the changes at an institutional level. So, for example, the pilots on gender equality frameworks in the partner institutions that I've touched on before. So we also want to influence fairer access to opportunities. So that could include access to scholarships or international research opportunities, particularly for women or underrepresented groups. But that also links to the supportive policy environment where hopefully those opportunities open up through those institutional changes. We also aim to work on more supportive gender norms. So underpinning a lot of the biases is the gender stereotypes and so on that are reflected in the work of higher education institutions. And so by looking at gender-sensitive curriculum and teaching, it is about trying to change some of those gender norms, and particularly around the roles, the idea of role models and those people who are challenging the gender norms in higher education and STEM. In terms of enhancing the skills and agency of women and girls, I think this is about recognising that women and girls can internalise some of the gender norms and biases and therefore miss out on opportunities because of this and through some of the bias practices that happen in the institutions. So we see that there's a role for working directly with women and girls to build their skills, confidence, agency to influence their own careers, but also wider societal change. And this is very much not about a deficit approach. We're not saying there is a problem with women and girls, but it's about recognising that they may have been discriminated against or not had the opportunities. And really at the heart of what we do, we see dialogue, collaboration and collective action as key to influencing change. So whether it's in terms of collaboration between institutions in the UK and other countries, or between academia and women's networks and civil society organisations, the private sector. I think it's really important to build these networks and coalitions for change, and that's what we're aiming to do through some of the networks that we build in this area and contributing to this event. So I'll just touch briefly on some of the challenges and opportunities. So I think in terms of challenges, I think this isn't the case in this room, obviously, but in wider conversations and planning and working in this space, I think we have to acknowledge that there is resistance, and in some cases growing resistance, to addressing gender equality issues, and that's often in the form of denying the problem or minimising the issue. And I often have conversations around, well, we don't have a gender equality problem in our country because actually we have more women studying at universities than men. But actually, we know about all the kind of structural issues that are there. So we really need that evidence in place. And I think, gender-based violence is a particular issue that has been very hard to get traction around. So I think the more we can build the evidence in different countries around that, the better. And that was partly the reason why I commissioned the Gender and Higher Education report, to really kind of create an opportunity to shine a light on some of these issues. I think, making progress on gender and other inequalities is such a long-term process and requires long-term funding for this. And that's often a challenge for us in the British Council. Our funding depends on the government grant. There's been cuts in official development assistance money. We're trying to address some of this by building longer-term programmes that we'll invest in over a longer period, but I think it's still an issue and something that I'm sure many of your institutions will recognise. I just also wanted to acknowledge the practical challenges of taking an intersectional approach, particularly when you're working on a global level, because a lot of these issues are so context-specific. So it really comes down to really strong analysis of the particular context that you're working in. So some of the indicators and so on that might be used in the UK would certainly not work in India or Brazil or other places, because of the challenges, particularly around race, ethnicity, etc., are so different. I think in terms of the opportunities, being really intentional and purposeful, and that reason to act that you talked about this morning, and I think building that through, it might work for different people in terms of different parts of the business case, or the moral case, or the legal case, but it's finding those opportunities to act and being really clear about what we want to achieve and what's right for that particular context. I also think taking a life cycle perspective is really important. So thinking about, what comes before higher education and what happens after in terms of careers, both within academia but also beyond. So really understanding how we can address those. And the final area that I think is a huge opportunity is collaboration, learning and building networks. And this is something we're really keen to do as the British Council, hence supporting some of the work that's happening between Advance HE and India and Brazil. And I think beyond the equality charters, there's a real opportunity to share approaches to addressing a wide range of equality issues. So, sorry, I've probably overrun slightly, but thanks very much, everybody. It was really great to have the opportunity to speak to you.